Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free wire tutorial today, we're going to be using wire, but we're going to be using wire with a difference. So I've made this checkerboard inspired 3-strand bracelet utilising memory wire. Don't worry, there is some real wire in there as well. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look at the project, and then we'll make it together. So here is my checkerboard memory wire bracelet. The gemstones I'm using are 4mm sodalite and agate, and these are both faceted because I love how they capture the light. There are 3 pieces of memory wire, and as a closure I've used some 1mm or 18 gauge wire to create these closure points, and a standard silver plated toggle clasp. So I'm going to show you the nuts and bolts of this design, and I hope that you enjoy creating it as much as I do. Before you go anywhere with memory wire, it really does pay to think about your tools. Now, if you have ever accidentally cut hardened steel memory wire with your beautiful flush cutters, you will know the pain and anguish that this causes. So invest in some memory wire shears. I've got some Jewellery memory wire cutters, and I also absolutely love from Beadalon these memory wire finishing pliers. It makes it super easy to create those little coils on the end that some people struggle with. Those are the first things we're going to use today. In terms of the beads that I'm going to use for the demonstration piece, I may not create that full 3/4 length design, because I don't know how many of my carnelians I've got left. These are 4mm faceted carnelian rounds and 4mm smooth tiger's eye. Now they will complement each other perfectly well for the season, but you can use whatever colours you want. In terms of other things I'm adding in, as well as that clasp and a couple of lengths of that 1mm or 18 gauge wire which we'll use later, I've also pre-cut some belcher chain. Now this fits so perfectly well, and I'll just give it a measure in a second, but these are 5 link lengths, and it's important that they're 5 link lengths. This is a lovely silver plated piece that I got from Fleur at Relax and Craft, and it needs to be 5 links, and ideally those links need to be of a similar size to your beads. So these are 3mm round belcher chain links, and I'm using 4mm beads, and that just works really well. So I've pre-cut a number of those and just popped them into the bowl for now. So to begin with, I've got 3 full circles of that memory wire, and it's quite a light memory wire. It's not the heaviest. You do get different gauges of memory wire. This is a reasonably light one, but it's still a hardened steel, and it will still snap back into that round shape. So as long as you're working with a proper memory wire, make sure that your beads will absolutely go onto, not only must they go onto, but they must move around that curvature. If you have beads that have a drill hole that's exactly the same size as your memory wire, might get stuck, or it might struggle to move around that arc without damaging the bead, and we don't want that. So the first thing that we're going to do is to take 3 circles. Don't forget, please use memory wire cutters, memory wire shears only. And I'm going to start off with one of them. Now they're not all exactly the same size because I just took the reel of memory wire and snipped 3 off. So they're all slightly different sizes, but they are all around a full circle of wire. So what I'm going to start off by doing is using my lovely Beadalon memory wire finishing pliers. And no, I don't get a kickback, I just love them. What we're going to do is to grip very firmly on the end of that memory wire, holding the memory wire down and away from us, so that when we start rotating that pin around inside the memory wire, it spirals up really tightly to itself. So that's just 1 and a bit turns so far, and what we're looking to do is to press down where that very last bit, that cut end, sits. The reason I'm pressing down there is because it enables me to make that little spiral form, and I'm going to go for 3 turns, and these memory wire pliers are an absolute godsend for this. They're real boon. What I'm doing is making sure that that cut end sits flush to the circle that we're creating. I'm going to do that another 2 times. One of the reasons I've chosen to make this video tutorial today is because memory wire seems to get a lot of Hate's a strong word, but people don't seem to gel with it as much as they do with regular wire or perhaps other jewellery and beading media. So I wanted to make something that was really quite easy to approach and also to show you any little tips and tricks that might help you to get to grips with it. Let's head back down to the board and we'll get on with the next segment of today's tutorial. So I've got a triple spiral moving inwards inside the circular form of that memory wire on each of my 3 pieces of memory wire, and this is bracelet size. I forgot to say that. I thought it might be apparent. And what we're going to do is to take the first link on the first piece of chain and just stick that on the non-spiraled end. What we're going to do now is to skip a link and put the next piece of memory wire through that middle link so that links are facing in the same direction, and then we're going to add the lowest link with that last piece of memory wire. So just allow those to slide into position. Now what we're going to do is to stagger the entry points of that memory wire. So I'm going to put the lowest one furthest away, the highest one closest to my right hand, and the middle one in the middle. And what we're going to do is to start off by loading 3 beads onto each of those. So I'm going to pop on 3 of the tiger's eye on the lowest and onto the upper wire as well. And I'll join you back in a moment because watching me put beads on things is everybody's least favourite part of a tutorial, especially mine. So I'm going to go for 3 of one colour on the bottom and the top, and then the different colour in the middle. So the reason I cut the threading on the beads part out of my tutorials is because I'm a little bit slow at it, to be perfectly honest. It's not the funnest thing to watch. So we're going to add in another piece of chain, and this happens in exactly the same way. So it's quite small. So again, my really very excellent eyes, she said fibbing, don't help with this. So I've put the first piece of chain on the upmost of those 3 pieces of memory wire. And the reason they're staggered is because then it becomes just a little bit easier to add each of those links of chain onto each of those pieces of memory wire. Now what I tend to do is to just grip the first bead in the chain and then release those other bits and pieces out of the way. It just means that if I do drop it, those ones are likely to stay on and I only lose the most recent acquisitions. So I'm going to repeat, but this time it's going to be the one that was in the middle is now bottom and top. So I'll go for carnelian on the lower and upper, and I'll go for tiger's eye in the middle one, and I will add on 3 beads in exactly the same way. So once you've got your next sequence of 9 beads into position, we're going to grab the next piece of chain. So again, I'm staggering those memory wires, so it's just that little bit easier for me. I put the wrong piece of chain on. Just a little bit easier for me to get everything lined up because the chain will drop down and you can allow the correct link over the end of the correct piece of memory wire and just feed that on. And again, I will now grab the last couple of beads, scoot the rest of them out the way and allow it all to move down. So honestly, I'm not entirely sure how many of those carnelians I have left, so I'm going to continue around the bangle, or bracelet if you prefer, until I run out of those beads, and I'll join you back on the board in just a second. When you've added your last set of beads, so your last 9 beads in those differing colours, make sure that you add on a final piece of chain. What we're going to do is then scooch everything round so that it's all neat and tidy and as firmly up against that coiled up start point as possible. Now if you do have any gaps, just take a moment to get everything lined up. You do need both colours of beads to be the same size, or it all goes a little bit wrong. So just make sure that you're happy with how everything's sitting. If you have made an error in loading on those pieces of chain, it's well worth taking all of the beads off and getting it right, because it will never sit right unless they are in the correct orientation. So I've used every single carnelian that I already had available to me. And the strand has already made it through a couple of different tutorials and pieces of jewellery, so it's done really well. I also really like the colour combination of carnelian and tiger's eye. So we're left with a little bit of excess memory wire on the end. So again, I'm just going to pull each of those through to make sure that everything is nice and firmly brought together. And I'm going to trim the memory wire to just under an inch. Just under an inch. And again, I will say, please only ever use memory wire shears or cutters for the job, because your flush cutters will only manage this once and then they probably won't manage much of anything ever again. So if you do have a little bit more than an inch, don't overly worry. The reason I say just under an inch, and it's about 7/8 of an inch is the exact amount, so I could grab a ruler and we'll see how much more I need to trim away. About 7/8 of an inch will give you that 3 turns. On the smaller side of my memory wire finishing pliers, now this is a 2mm pin, so you may have memory wire finishing pliers, you may have round nose pliers, or you may have multi-step bail making pliers, but we're looking for around about a 2mm gap. So let's just give this excess on the end a little bit of a measure. So yes, that is indeed more than I need. So I need to take it down just a little bit further. I don't want to take it too far. So I'm just going to trim a little bit off the end, and doing that one piece at a time is probably smart. However, this is a slightly lighter memory wire. It's not the super thick, super heavy one. And I have got the proper tool for the job. These Xuron bullet nose memory wire cutters are very good. Now things might just get a little bit active, so do control that. If you need to put a piece of tape on this to stop it all coming away, please do so. The main thing is try not to put it down. It might all go a bit springy. So what we're going to do is to start on the lowest of those 3 pieces of memory wire and just take control of that wire from the get-go. So right at the end of that wire, I'm going to roll that around, very, very firmly gripping those pliers and pressing it together. So ideally, I want those to all move up in the same rotation. So I'm just going to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And that's just under 3 rotations, so maybe stick to an inch. Maybe I misremembered. And again, we're going to start rotating that around. Now you may find that when you get closer to the middle, you might need to just adjust your grip slightly so you can get that right underneath. Yeah, I would say stick with an inch of length. I'll edit that on the subtitles. Rotate that wire around, and on this one I'm going to have it spiraling downwards so that it moves inside the bracelet end. So memory wire is really good in so much as it will snap back into its position. So if you need to just gently ease that out so you can get a really tight coil. Of course, the other thing you can do is flip that over. On the 2 outside ones, you can definitely get that really, really tight just by going in from the opposite direction. The middle one, you might have to go in at a bit of a wacky angle and turn that over. So this one is going to be slightly smaller in terms of the amount of gemstone, but very impactful on the back of the wrist. Now you can, of course, finish this off exactly however you want to. You could go through with beading thread and bring that down to a single point, but I'm going to show you a really easy way to create little ends for this piece. I have 4-inch length of 18 gauge 1mm wire. This is a silver plated wire, and I'm going to make that really warm. It is very, very chilly today for me. Making that nice and warm, and we're going to start about 1/3 from one end, and we're going to create a rounded form. Now the mandrel I'm using, I'll show you the size, is 0.25 of an inch. 6.3mm, so 1/4 of an inch across. You could use a very fine pencil, or again, if you've got multi-step bail makers, you'll probably find something on there around the 6mm mark, which will work. What we're trying to do here, we've got that little loop created, and it's about 1/3 of the way along from one end. Let's scooch that out of the way. And what we're going to do is to feed that through all 3 loops and allow that to just snake around until it sits neatly in position. Now it's quite a small loop compared to the distance between those beads, and it just draws the ends together neatly, and then the chain on the end just nestles over the top of those loops you made and hides all the gubbins quite nicely. So what we're going to do now is to grip across that loop, bring one of those wires away at a right angle. Just going to take a second to centralise that, and then I'm going to create the first half of a double wrapped loop bar. Let's just push that down and around, trying to keep that as neat as possible. I'll probably go for 3 wraps, and I'm just going to leave that sticking out for a moment. Just tidy up any of those wraps if you need to. Now, because this is a smaller segment of gemstone beads, or whichever beads you plan on using, I may need to adapt the design. So this one, let's have a look at how different they are. Actually, it's only, I think, 1 segment shorter. So on this one, I elected to create these 2 double wrapped loops. Essentially, it's like a bit of a rosary link, but without the bead. And then, because it's quite a long piece of beading, I was able to simply join that together with one of these lovely silver-plated lobster clasps. What I may need to do here is add a tiny bit of chain or something else just to bring it together. I'm not going to show you the complete process, just one end of it. So what we're going to do now is to smooth and warm through the end section. If you are creating something exactly the same as this one, on one side you would attach into that little clasp closure, and on the other side you'd make a large round loop. So I'm just going to show you how to attach in the clasp. And if you want to recreate the sodalite and agate one, you can absolutely do that just by creating a much larger loop on the end that you plan on attaching into. So what we're going to do is to grip across that wire, turn that away at a right angle, and then we're going to use that 2mm side of my memory wire finishing pliers. These are handy little things, and draw that around. Now I want these 2 pieces of wire to meet, so you can see, if I just take that down into the focal zone a little bit more, that on the side that's attached to the end of the beads, the wire's coming over the top to the right hand side. So I want to create a loop that goes also over the top of that core, but in the opposite direction. And in that way, when I bring these 2 end pieces together, they can meet up in the middle. So another thing that always confuses me, and I have to think really hard about when I'm making jewellery, is when you're creating a loop to put a closure in. If I want this to have the opening bit on top and the openable bit underneath, when I slide it on the end of the wire, I need to invert that. So the openable bit is up, put that into the loop of wire, spin it through that turn. It doesn't matter if you deform it slightly, because as it goes round the loop, it flips over. And I've been making jewellery for 15 years now, and I always have to think really, really hard about that. It's a bit like putting earrings into an earring finding. Somehow my little brain doesn't quite make it. So let's grip across that loop shape, push the tail all the way around, and I'm just going to wrap another time. Give that a bit of a squeeze, tighten it up if you need to. I'm kind of going through it fairly quickly because I don't want you to get bored. And I know that I can get another wrap in there, so I'm going to grip across that loop shape, draw the wire all the way around over the top one more time, and then leave it sticking out a second. I think, probably because I've got more wire on this side, I'm just going to take that one over one more time, make it squidge down into the gap, press those 2 together, and then I'll show you the underside in just a second. I'm going to grip hold of this very firmly, I'm going to compress those little coils of wire, make that as neat as I can, and then I'm going to push both sides down, giving that a little bit of help if it needs it, making sure that I haven't completely knackered that loop, bring that to where it's supposed to be, push those 2 sides down. And what we're going to do now is to find our standard cutters. Now I put these off my desk when I'm working with memory wire because these are wonderful cutters and I don't want to ruin them on memory wire. So I always keep them out of the way, which is why I had to do a bit of a reach. Now I've trimmed away the wire with a bit of a tail on it just there. You can see that tail. I'm going to do the same on the other side. You can always take a little bit more off. Adding a bit more on is a little more tricky. So now I've trimmed that first side, I'm just going to make sure that that loop is in the orientation I want it to be in. And it does benefit you to use a second pair of pliers to help with the closing up of this invisible wrap. Let's scoot that out the way, grip hold of the form. Now you're going to need to do this in sort of 2 bites of the cherry. So if I just hold with my very useless left hand And then what I'm going to do is close up the piece of wire that comes from the left side first, because if you try to close up the piece of wire that comes from the right side, when you're gripping the left side, it will spin and weaken the design. So I'm going to close that up on the underside, that's a side that sits inside of the wrist. And then we're going to assess how much more I can trim away. I can trim quite a lot. There's not much left to fill. So I'm going to take that last little bit off. And then we need to close up those two pieces of wire so they meet. So I'm going to give that a grip and a squish. And if you've taken enough off, you can press both of those ends down until they meet and you get this lovely, smooth, invisible closure. There we go. So from the top, it's a really nice seamless design. Underneath, it's none too shabby either. Might need to just straighten that. So in hindsight, I probably would prefer to have chain instead of a long clasp assembly like this. But because I don't really want to put chain in, I much rather have it from assembly to assembly. I've made it quite long. You can make these look a lot tidier if you keep them quite short so that there's only 2 wraps on either side. So when you make that second angle change to create the loop, bring it a little bit closer to that first loop and then they will be a little bit smaller, a little bit more diminutive, neat and tidy. It's much easier to control that flow of wire if you've got less turns to think about. So all I would need to do to finish off on the other side is repeat that process, but instead of adding in a clasp, I'm going to make this loop much larger, as I have done on this piece. And I think on this one, I simply used that 6.3mm or 1/4 inch dowel again to create that beautiful round form. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed that memory wire checkerboard bracelet design with me today, and I hope that it makes memory wire a little bit more friendly for you. I'll take photographs once I've finished off that second bracelet and leave them on the outro screen. Do please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel costs you nothing, and neither does hyping the video itself. That needs to be done in the first week when it's uploaded, and it doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps me to be seen by the wider community. Have an amazing day. Drop me a comment if there's something specific you'd like me to make in the future, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.